It's a cool and pleasant country on the shores of Lake Victoria. But for 2 decades, it was a byword for blood-stained tyranny. This was the nation ruled by Idi Amin and Milton Obote, a land of darkness. Then, 10 years ago, Yoweri Museveni fought his way to power. Slowly, the clouds have parted. There's security now, and even a degree of freedom. Uganda is on the way to becoming once again what the British settlers called it, the Pearl of Africa. Even now, Uganda discourages outside scrutiny of its human rights record. Yet this particular Australian has been welcomed, despite her determination to set free a group of prisoners. Because nobody wants to keep these captives behind bars. Unfortunately, setting them free won't be simple, and it won't be cheap. Formerly a keeper of African mammals at Sydney's Taronga Zoo, veterinary nurse Debby Cox has worked with captive chimpanzees for 15 years.
He's a good boy, He's a good boy, is that Robbie? Hey, what's that on your nose? What's that on your nose?
She's horrified at the conditions in which Entebbe Zoo's chimpanzees are confined.
This is Sequoia. He's basically been here for 20 years now. He came here as an infant.
An old chimp like Sequoia is doomed to a life of captivity. But at least it could be made a lot pleasanter.
These are the plans that we have from Taronga, and we hope to adopt them.
Modelling their plans on the chimp enclosure at Taronga Zoo, Debby Cox and the new director, Wilhelm Muller, are hoping to make use of the zoo's extensive grounds by the shores of Lake Victoria.
We would like to establish an enclosure here for them, to give them at least the feeling they have a little bit nature around them instead of keeping them in a closed cage.
The problem is money. The moat for the new chimp enclosure has already been dug with the help of American aid. But now the funds have dried up again.
It's very frustrating when you're working with them that you have to just sit and wait until somebody who's got money is going to come across and give you the money to do what you need to do. I think of them as people. They are people. They're chimp people. Yeah.
Oh, come.
For the younger chimp people at Entebbe, Debby Cox and Wilhelm Muller have still more ambitious plans. The majority of the zoo's chimpanzees are orphans under 5 years old. They've been captured from the wild by poachers to be sold off as pets. Most of them saw their mothers killed before their eyes.
This is Mika.
They're gluttons for affection.
This is the baby of the group. They enjoy physical contact with anybody that they can get, which can be quite daunting for people when they first meet a chimp, that they actually run up and want to be held and grabbed.
And they do a fair bit of grabbing themselves. A $3 plastic basketball will do. A $70,000 TV camera is even better.
Katie, leave it alone. Kate, hands off. Take your hands off. That's it. You can look, but you've got to take your hands off, okay? That's a good girl.
Their curiosity is insatiable, their energy exhausting.
We should make a play session every day. We should make a play session every day to come in with them. They need to expel their energy.
Any live chimpanzee found in private hands in Uganda is automatically confiscated and handed over to the zoo for safekeeping. But it's unthinkable to Debby Cox that they should be condemned to a life sentence, perhaps 50 or 60 years, in a wire mesh concrete cage.
Our idea here is not to keep the chimps in a zoo situation. We want them out as close to being in the wild as possible. At this stage we can't reintroduce them, but we can build sanctuaries for them that are basically a wild habitat as close as we can get to, where we can still manage them and provide for them as we have to, but they can live their life as free from us as possible.
One sanctuary for orphaned chimps has already been established in Uganda. It's in the Queen Elizabeth National Park, 6 hours' drive from Entebbe, on the shores of Lake Edward. For the animal as well as the human inhabitants of Uganda, there's been dramatic improvement since the days of Idi Amin and Milton Obote.
I know during the bad periods here in Uganda, the wildlife were totally slaughtered, and you would drive through national parks, it would be totally empty of animals, it would be void of it. And now in 8 years, we're seeing massive numbers of hippos, of elephant. You see the Ugandan cob just everywhere, and that's just really great to see.
The Chimp Sanctuary was what we had really come to see. It's been established on a small island out in the lake, close enough for tourists to visit, but safe from predators like leopards, and guarded 24 hours a day from poachers. The sanctuary chimps will never be self-sufficient. There isn't enough food on the island to sustain them, but human contact is kept to a minimum. The keepers rarely set foot on the island itself. Meticulous notes are taken about every individual chimp and how well they're adapting to their semi-wild existence.
These are coming down to retrieve food.
That's the Kidogo.
Kidogo, for example, has become famous among the keepers for her dogged persistence in adversity. The most rewarding experiment has been the recent introduction of a 3-month-old infant, a Kiki. She was adopted by an older female, Peace, who it seems is now prepared to share the load of motherhood with her companions.
Hey, who's coming down now?
That is Kone carrying a Kiki. And previously, Peace has not been releasing the little baby to these little girls, Sophie, Kone, and Nagoti. But these days we can see Kone carrying a Kiki when they are going up to the clearing.
To have a young female like Sophie giving food is really good to see, and they're showing really excellent mothering behaviour.
The chimps have adapted remarkably well to a life without humans, and the sanctuary is financially self-supporting. But there's no room here for the orphans back at Entebbe. The hunt is on for another suitable sanctuary site, and $100,000 to help set it up. But Debbie's dreams don't stop there.
I would prefer, rather than see the chimps in sanctuaries just sort of be in retirement homes, which is what at the moment it appears that they are, that these chimps should be going back to the wild, that we rebuild forests, and those forests that we rebuild, they become the homes for the chimps rather than these type of sanctuaries. You know, they've got to learn the skills. There's no way these orphans would have a chance against wild chimps, but maybe their grandchildren would have a chance against them, because each time a generation comes by, they're learning more things.
There are still places in Uganda where wild chimpanzees are living the life that Debby Cox dreams of for her orphans' grandchildren. And there's no better guide than Richard Wrangham, one of the world's foremost primatologists.
Interval between birth to surviving offspring is something like over 7 years.
Yeah, wow, that's a long time, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the longest.
For 12 years, the Harvard University professor has been returning to the Kibale Reserve to spend weeks panting up and down the steep forest paths in pursuit of a community of wild chimpanzees.
I think we're talking about a greeting between two parties here.
He knows every member of the group by name, even when glimpsed through a thick screen of foliage.
This is Makoku. I haven't seen him since August. So you can see they're eating these ground herbs, and if you have them in Kibera, Mount Cloa, like this one, but much bigger, and they eat the pith. But while they're doing this, they're very difficult to see. They're in this thick vegetation. And so what we want is to wait here until they come out into the open after eating.
And sure enough, after a few minutes' wait, an adult male made its way cautiously out onto the path only meters away.
This is LB, light brown, and he's a beautiful young male. He's in his mid-20s, something like that. He has not shown any kind of serious interest in competing for high rank. He's kind of everybody's friend. Mind you, he can put the fear of God into you if he starts displaying. He has the most terrific displays. He slaps the ground absolutely beautifully. And it is only because he has come this close that we are this close. If we walked up to this close, he would be nervous about us. But it's wonderful because we've been studying chimps here now for about 12 years, going back, and they're really letting us see into their wild society. Their social lives have the kind of complexity that a human society does. They're full of very strong emotions, tremendous affection, tremendous affiliation, but also maybe feelings of hostility, feelings of revenge for something done, not just to them, but to their relatives, to their friends. Just with a little grunt saying, off we go.
Within a couple of minutes, we had another visitor.
This is Johnny. And Johnny is very relaxed with us too. His hair is slightly erect and he's a little nervous about this tripod. So,
Nobody knows how many chimpanzees there are in Kibale Forest. Somewhere between 500 and 1,000. In countries like Zaire to the west, poaching is rife. But here, they're relatively safe.
it's nothing, don't worry.
As members of a 500-strong gene pool, Johnny, light brown and their descendants have a long-term future, as long as their forest remains undisturbed. But many of Africa's chimps are in danger of slowly dying out, and Debby Cox believes her orphan chimps can help.
Right now the wild population on paper looks quite healthy if you look at the actual numbers. But the problem is most of the populations are isolated and they're very small pockets. Some of them are down to 50 animals.
3 hours' drive from the Kibale Forest, back in the Queen Elizabeth National Park, is the Chambura Gorge. It's a 16-kilometre-long gash in the flat savanna country. In the gorge itself, a river flows through a dark, moist rainforest whose trees tower 40 metres above the ground. Here lives a community of 24 wild chimpanzees. They're guarded and protected, they have enough to eat, but the open savanna country is impassable for these shy forest animals. They're permanently cut off from the rest of their kind. There are many such isolated populations of chimpanzees all over Central Africa. In the long run, says Debby Cox, these communities are too small to survive. Constant inbreeding will produce mutations, increasing infant mortality, and finally extinction.
Right now it doesn't happen and we're not going to see it, but in 50 years, 100 years, 200 years' time, this will happen. And if we don't do something to stop it, we will lose these chimps. So my idea is that we form forest bridges between the isolated populations, reforest those areas, make a corridor where the chimps can pass. But of course, if you're looking at 80 kilometres, there's no way you're going to get one population moving 80 kilometres to another population. So to fill in the gap, we would use the sanctuary chimps.
Back in Kibale Forest, Richard Wrangham is not entirely discouraging. 2 years ago, his team tried to introduce a single orphaned female into the wild community that he studies.
What that told us is, I think it is possible. That particular effort didn't work. But she was very young. She was only about 4.5 years old. And if the right things happened, you could do it. But you've got to be incredibly lucky. And for most of these orphan chimps, there's nothing you can do except give them as good a home as possible in captivity.
By a good home in captivity, Richard Wrangham emphatically doesn't mean a place like this. The hunt for more sanctuary sites is urgent before the chimps grow too old to make the transition to semi-freedom. Whether or not they hold the future of their species in their genes, the fact is that 98% of those genes are precisely the same as our own. If this is no way to treat an innocent human being, it's no way to treat an orphaned chimpanzee.